Hi, JJ here with The Art of Value. In this episode, I'm going to go through what Mohnish Pabrai recently said in a Q&A about his destination analysis for Micron Technology. That is, what's going to happen to the company and the stock price over the next 7 to 8 years as he sees it. This follows on from my last episode where I summarized what Mohnish said in a recent Q&A with William and Mary College about his investment thesis for Micron. He said more than he had previously about his investment thesis for Micron. I'll leave a link to that in the description so you can go and see that later. In the Q&A, Mohnish had a question about whether he's concerned about margins being down a little bit for Micron in the previous quarter. He said quite emphatically that he doesn't care about what's happening with Micron this quarter or even this year. It's really with Micron the destination analysis that counts. He says it does matter what's happening in the industry with the three major players, the oligopoly of Micron, Hynix and Samsung. He said those players are making about $150 billion a year top line, and over the next 7 to 8 years they should make about $300 billion, he thinks, a year. He says we don't know whether that'll happen, nobody knows for sure, but he thinks it's likely to be 300 to 350 billion over time. He says Micron might be about 75, 85 to 100 of that 300 figure. At the moment it's about 31 in revenue. He said he could see Micron banging out about 20 to 30 billion a year in cash flow. At the moment, free cash flow is at 3 billion and cash flow from operations is just over 15 billion. He said by then the market could recognize that it's not the old terrible DRAM business anymore, and even in downturns it should do well, and there's not the cyclicality, the big highs and lows that it's seen in previous years. So he says at some point the market could believe that Micron can produce 20 to 30 billion dollars in revenue and start to value it accordingly. So he says who cares about the rest? Who cares what it's doing this year, this quarter? It's about the long term. He literally says, I don't care about the next quarter. He says when Jeff Bezos runs a company, he's thinking 7 to 10 years. He's making investments for the next 7 to 10 years. And as an investor, you have to think like the owner of the business like that. You can't look at the next quarter, the next year. You have to think long term. What's this going to look like in 7, 8, 10 years? He says if you don't think this way, like an owner of the business, long term, how they're investing for the long term, you're not going to be able to hold it when the share price goes down because of the market. You need to understand it and hold for the long term. He says it's completely irrelevant what happens in the next quarter to Micron's earnings. He says he doesn't even look at it. So on share price, he thinks we can get a couple of $100 a share, no problem over time. And he bought in the 30s. So he says if we can get 200 to 250 and they're buying back shares and so on, it should be a good return. My average price is 45, which is higher than him, but it should be fine. If it plays out the way that he says, I'll be happy with that. If you're getting value out of this episode so far, please consider giving us a like on YouTube to help with the algorithm. Appreciate that, thanks. However, he does say it's not his highest conviction idea, but it's a good business, good management, and they understand capital allocation, so it should do well over time. So in terms of the overall portfolio, he says he's got 9 other bets. That's 10 stocks, about 10%. He said 5 or 6 of them could do really well. 1 or 2 could flatline, 1 or 2 could take a loss, and they'll still hit a home run. So everything is fine. So that's Mohnish Pabrai's destination analysis of Micron. What do you think of that? Let me know in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. It's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next 7 to 8 years. If you've got value out of this episode, please consider subscribing on YouTube if you're watching there, or if you're in your favorite podcast app, follow and subscribe, whatever it allows you to do. Thanks for watching or listening.